If you have not yet, we want you to get familiar with how to use Padlet. Could you drop that link again in there, Melissa, for the question and answer Padlet? And we'll probably have to keep dropping it in there. Thank you all for being here. The chat is active, so I want to remind you that that's available to you to ask questions. And the Padlet is another place for you to post questions, things that we may not be able to answer during the course of our training today, but we will take the time and work with our team of experts, both at the agency and our partners, to ensure those questions get answered. And if you are an expert and you have an answer and you want to go ahead and comment on the question that's being asked, you are welcome to do that on the Padlet. If you were planning to attend the annual training for building points of contact, you've landed in the right place, and we're glad that you're here. I'm Vivian, and I am the Homeless Student Stability Education Program Supervisor, and that piece of legislation also oversees building points of contact. So I'll be your meeting facilitator for today, along with some other of my team members. And I'm really excited about the work that we're doing because it cultivates inclusion, which is certainly one of my values. I'm going to kick it over to Stacy to let her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stacy Clem, the OSPI supervisor for the foster care program, and I really believe in equality.
Melissa, why don't you go ahead?
Hello, everyone. My name is Melissa, and I am the OSPI training supervisor for homeless education. My core values include being kind and empathy and joy. Savannah.
Hi, I'm Savannah Cavaletto. I'm the program specialist for foster care at OSPI, I guess, obviously. I really like to learn, and some of my core values are being creative and being adaptable. And I think, am I continuing to talk, I believe? So I'll just.
I think you're good, Savannah. We're passing it over to you for the next.
All right. So if you could please mute your microphones, this is just important so that we can all hear the presentation and not be distracted by other noises. So you should see at the bottom of your screen, there is a microphone. So you want to make sure you have that red line across the microphone. That means that you are muted. If it's not, if you do not have that line, it means you're unmuted. If you need closed captions, you can see at that same toolbar where your mute and unmuted are, you can click on the CC that says show captions and select your language, and that will pop up as well.
You should have gotten a note also letting you know that the meeting is being recorded if you have not yet. So just a reminder that we will be recording this and it will be available to you on our website once we have edited it for ADA compatibility. And Savannah, if you want to cover this piece right here.
Okay, so another thing that's important for those of you seeking clock hours especially is changing your name. So it needs to be your first and your last name. So you would go into where you see participants on the bottom of your screen, where your mute button is, where your closed caption is, and you would click on that. Then you click on more next to your name, you click rename, and you type in your first and last name and click OK.
Thanks, Savannah. And if I can get down here, I'm going to drop the PD Enroller link in the chat. If for some reason you have not registered through PD Enroller, it will be open for the rest of the day so that you will be able to go in and register for those clock hours.
The one that I watched, whatever it was I feel like much more geared to like high school.
Just a reminder to mute your microphones. Thank you. We'll take a quick look at our agenda for today. We tried to work in a lot of breaks. We know that this is a long day, and we appreciate everybody that has chosen to come and participate. It's a relatively full house. I think last time we checked, there were over 307 of you registered. Ultimately, we may end up with, we have the capacity for 500. We may end up with that. So our first session this morning is going to be covering kind of the building contacts basics and some more in-depth information on McKinney-Vento and foster care. We'll take a break. Then we'll go on to looking at some trauma-informed practices around creating welcoming spaces, understanding the housing continuum, and we'll have a fun activity around resource identification. We'll break for lunch for an hour from 12 to 1. At 1 o'clock, our migrant education team is going to join us and from OSPI, and we will be learning a lot about credit accrual strategies and credit conversion. And then we'll take another break at 1:55. And at 2:05, we'll look at kind of that supporting students through high school and beyond, and be done by 3 o'clock. Now, the morning is really set up that it is appropriate for everyone. And I will say that session from 2 to 3, while it does talk about high school and beyond, has a lot in it that is appropriate for any grade level. But we certainly understand if you get what you need in the morning session and you don't choose to come back after 1 o'clock, that might be more tailored to people who are working at the secondary level. And or post-secondary level. And I'll kick it over to you, Melissa, for the our land acknowledgement.
All right. With gratitude and respect, we acknowledge the Indigenous peoples who have been working and living on this land and these waters since time immemorial and who still inhabit the area today. OSPI is on the land of the Nisqually, the Squaxin, Cowlitz, and Coast Salish people. We welcome you all today.
Thank you, Melissa. So we'll go ahead and move right into our first segment, which is really, we kind of focused each of these on like different areas of trauma-informed practices. And one of the practices we know is compassion. And that piece of you being the contact in the building is really a form of just a person who's there to show compassion to these students who need it probably more than a lot of other, well, we all need compassion, so let me not say that, but they may just be really desperately in need of it at the time that they're coming in and connecting with you. Many of you are obviously supporting both students experiencing homelessness and students in foster care. That's pretty common across the state. What we see is that the liaisons and the contacts often are supporting both populations, particularly in smaller districts. In larger districts, sometimes the capacity is there to have a separate person supporting foster care students and another person supporting your students experiencing homelessness. The majority of you are school counselors. A few of you are school social workers. And then we see that a number of you are family support specialists, and thank you for dropping in those other roles that were not necessarily mentioned, such as nurses, federal programs directors, advocates. I think that's come down. And let's go ahead and move on to our next component. So what we want to do initially is we want to remind you that McKinney-Vento and foster care no longer is under McKinney-Vento. With the passage of the Every Student Succeeds Act in 2015, they created provisions separate for students in foster care and removed foster care awaiting foster care placement from the McKinney-Vento definition of students experiencing homelessness. And so that change went into effect in 2016. Although there is still some confusion out there, even, what is it now, 6 years, 7 years later, that people still think that foster care is part of McKinney-Vento. They're two separate programs, and while they do have some similarities, which we will talk about today, there are a number of things that are different about them as well. And I'm going to pass it off to our foster care program supervisor, Stacy, to let her walk you through.
Thanks, Vivian. Good morning, everyone. I'll be talking a little bit about foster care building points of contacts. Next slide. So which students qualify as foster care? The key words with this are subject of a dependency proceeding. So if they are any kind of subject of a dependency proceeding, that means they're under the care of the child welfare organization, which is DCYF, or a tribal child welfare system. So these are just some examples of where they may be living, but the key thing to always remember is, whether or not they are subject of a dependency proceeding. And also recently it was added to include those children who are on a trial return home basis. A lot of times those children were going back into their homes and they weren't considered to be foster care students, but they are now. So even if they have returned home on a trial return home basis, they are still in foster care. Next slide. School. Why does school matter? Well, we know that every time a student changes placements, they lose between 4 to 6 months of academic progress. So we really want to keep those students in school so they don't continue to fall behind. With each school move, they keep falling behind, and pretty soon it really adds up and they're really far behind their peers. So we want to keep them in school. We also know that they have a lot of connections in those schools. Maybe they have a really tight connection with a teacher or an administrator or even, the librarian, but those connections are there, and those connections are really important when students are going into foster care, because there's a lot of trauma around that different change in home placement and, being away from your family. So we really want to keep those kids in school so they are connected to the people that they are tied to at the school. And sometimes their siblings are at that school. So we want to make sure that they're staying in the same school that they went into when they went into foster care. Next slide. So ESSA outlined some key provisions for foster care, and there's 4 main ones that really apply to the job that you guys are doing in our schools. The first one is that every school district is required to designate a foster care liaison. And we do have that at the building, at the district level. And so then Washington took that a step further and said every school has to have a building point of contact, which many of you are. So that's another state piece that wasn't necessarily part of ESSA, but it's really important to continue that stability. The second one is that students remain in school of origin unless there is a determination that it is not in their best interest. And that school of origin means the school that they were in when they were placed into foster care. Students in foster care are entitled to immediate enrollment, even without documents normally required. And schools OSPI must collaborate with child welfare agencies. Next slide. So best interest determinations happen when a student is placed into foster care and there's a chance that they may be moving to a different school because of their new placement. So those best interest determinations need to happen as quickly as possible. And while those are happening, the student stays in that school of origin until that best interest determination is made. We want to make sure that everyone involved in that child's life is able to participate and gather that meaningful input. So that could mean a teacher, that can mean, if they're in special ed, someone from the special ed team. If they have a strong connection to, like I said, the librarian, include that librarian, but anyone who knows that student and has input that would impact their change of placement in school should be at that meeting. And when you're in those meetings, you want to consider things like their age, their length of placement. Sometimes students are moved to a foster care placement that might only last 2 weeks. We don't want to be moving a student to a different school where they're only going to be there for a couple of weeks and then need to move again. So you really want to look at that length of placement, whether they have special needs, if they have a 504 or an IEP, what time of the school year is it, at grade level, and all those existing connections at the school that I talked about previously. Next slide.
Cece, really quickly, one of the questions that came up at our last training was, who is the person that facilitates or convenes the best interest determination meetings?
So the foster care liaison and the DCYF caseworker. Sometimes it's not always the caseworker. Sometimes it's the regional education lead. Those are the two people that should be coordinating those best interest determination meetings.
Thank you.
So immediate enrollment also means that they should be attending. So if it is decided that it's in the best interest of the student to move to a different school, then if they're at school A and you're moving them to school B can't say, well, we can't have the student attend until we get all the paperwork. Foster care students, that doesn't apply. So whether or not the new school has all the paperwork or, medical records, immunization, whatever it is, they cannot delay that enrollment. So they have to take that student immediately, and that student needs to be attending school. So just keep that in mind if the next school says, well, we can't take them until we have the records. This is actually federal law that says, no, you have to take these students. You can, try to get those records as quickly as possible, but the student needs to be enrolled and attending. Next slide. These are some state legislation pieces that are really important to the work that you're doing. And these are all hyperlinked. So when you get the PowerPoint, you'll be able to click on them. And they're also on the foster care website. So it's always easy to access these, but it's really important to also know these laws because they really kind of guide the work that you do. And so if you have time, whenever you have time and get the PowerPoint, I would suggest you click on these and just read them. None of them are long. They're all really short. The collaboration with DCYF1 is literally one sentence, so it's not going to be time consuming to look at these, but it's really important to review them. Next slide. So I talked a minute ago about best interest determination meetings and those regional education leads. And so Washington is split up into 6 regions throughout the state. And each region has a DCYF regional education lead. And you can find those on the foster care website at OSPI also. And you can also click on that hyperlink when you get this PowerPoint to know who those are. But the regional education leads are really important because a lot of times the caseworkers have a lot of high turnover, and these education leads have been there for a while and they know what's happening. So if you're having trouble getting hold of a caseworker, you really need something from DCYF, I recommend you start reaching out to the regional education leads. Next. So collaboration with child welfare. That is a federal law under ESSA that we are supposed to be collaborating with them because it's really been decided, and it makes total sense that when a student is in foster care, the key person really to contact with that school is that DCYF caseworker, and they need to know what's happening with the student. They need to make sure the student is attending school. They need to make sure of their academic progress. So it's really important to collaborate with child welfare, and that's DCYF or the tribal child welfare agencies. And some of the things that you'll do with collaboration with child welfare, like I said, is those best interest determinations. You'll be making transportation arrangements. And these are a lot of jobs that the foster care liaison will do, but it's also good for the building points of contact to know because you guys are the ones right in the schools and you know these students and you want to make sure these things are happening. So DCYF is also responsible for paying any outstanding fees and fines. So if these students go into foster care today and they have a $40 lunch balance, then DCYF is responsible for paying that. If they have a library fee, also DCYF is responsible. So you want to work with the foster care liaison and make sure those fees and fines are paid. Also, as soon as students go into foster care, they are automatically eligible for free lunch. There's no application that is needed. They don't have to fill out anything. They're just eligible immediately. And then you want to make sure that the social workers are receiving the student report cards, attendance reports, invite them to parent-teacher conferences. The IEP meetings are allowed to attend the IEP meetings, but social workers are not allowed to make any decisions at those IEP meetings, just so you know. But these are just a few pieces of how you'll collaborate with them. Next.
There's a couple questions in the chat. I just want to address. You will receive the slides And you will also receive the slide deck and the recordings. However, we have to edit them first before, so they won't be available right away, but they will be available to you. And Christiane has asked you a question of how does it work if a student has an expulsion from a former district, but we don't have the records to know that? And I think Christiane is talking about that immediate enrollment piece.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I guess I don't. How do we know the discipline records?
I think,
that what- Let me see
Christiane,
if
do
I
you
can
want to
find
come
it.
off mute?
Let me see if I can find it. Oh, yes. Okay, I see it. Christiane, did you email us yesterday or the day before? Is she there?
I don't know. She might be in the middle of something. Well, you know what?
Yeah.
We'll add that question to the our Q&A Padlet, and we can address that at that time.
Okay,
And
yeah.
then the question,
And-
do social workers make 504 decisions? That would depend on the situation in your school. That's usually your special programs person.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm here. This is Christiane.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, my unmute button disappeared on me for a second. So I'm talking about if a student has been expelled for like a weapons charge, and they change placements, the new foster parent's enrolling the student, but we don't have the information that that student has been expelled for a year. So when I push for immediate enrollment, and then I've got a kid on campus that is really expelled from schools, we don't know that information because we haven't received the records yet from the former school. So I'm just kind of curious about that piece of it.
Okay. Yeah, I think, I know Lee emailed you back. It gave you some guidance with some wax about that, but you should have had the best interest determination. If you didn't have a best interest determination, the first thing you should do when you know a student is coming is to reach out to that school district, immediately and figure out.
That school district didn't respond.
The school district didn't respond.
The
Was it-
social worker didn't respond, the school district didn't respond. So I was just doing what was in the kids' best interest and getting them enrolled.
Right. Okay. So yeah, that's a tricky situation, because then you're going to have to try to reach out to the DCYF educational lead, or, did you have any contact with the caseworker? Those are the things that they should know about also.
Yeah, they should, but there was no
didn't?
response. So I
Okay.
got myself into some hot water because I had a kid that
No, it's not
to
your
school
fault.
because we then learned that they'd been expelled, and
Right.
we didn't
Okay.
have a response from any of these folks.
Yeah, so I think you did the right thing because you emailed us, and that's the thing that you should do is just, if you're not getting a hold of DCYF, if you're not getting hold of the other school, then contact us immediately, because then we could start to figure out, what the last placement was. We could reach out to the school and try to navigate that, help you navigate that, because it should be all on you. But yeah, that is a tricky situation because there should be some information about the student, and it sounds like the student just showed up. So, and then I think the WAC for reentry, says that after expelling or suspending a student, has a right to reasonable return efforts to get that student back in the educational setting as soon as possible. And then there's a whole situation around what if the student has an IEP. So
Yeah, well, I understand the IEP part of it. And
Yeah.
and that is true unless it's a weapons charge, because then it's a mandatory by law
Right.
1 year expulsion. So
Yeah, Christian, there's
thank you.
definitely going to be balls dropped, but definitely all of you, if there's ever something you're not getting hold of anyone, you're not getting hold of the caseworker or the regional education lead, always just call me or email me as soon as possible, and I will help you navigate those instances.
I just think it's something for McKinney-Vento also. I mean, as we do
Yeah.
this and we're enrolling kids immediately, that this is something to be mindful of, that there is that piece. And so as much as I advocate for immediate enrollment and try and get kids in as fast as I can, even if I'm not getting response, this has now put me in a little bit of a, to hold back on that a little bit, because
Yeah.
there's that other piece of it. And so, and of course you have to have cooperating parties, but if we're thinking about doing that for every single time an MV or a foster kid enrolls in our district, and we have to think about whether they have an expulsion from the last district, that's a lot to think about, especially in our district where we have, 2,000 MV kids.
All right. Now you brought up a good point. I'll reach out to Lee and see if we can figure out how we can provide you guys all some guidance on this situation. Thanks, Christiane. So some of the first steps as a building point of contact is that you're going to want to know who those students are in your building. So you're going to want to request a list of students in foster care from your foster care liaison. And hopefully your foster care liaison is pulling that list every day and then notifying you via email or however you communicate. But you'll definitely want to know who those kids are. Then the next thing you'll want to try to do is obtain a copy of the DCYF school notification form from the foster care liaison. They should be getting it. We know it's not always happening. We have a lot of issues between our social workers and them not understanding that they need to provide that to the school. So we know that that's a problem. So someone might show up on your Cedars foster care student list and you might not have that school notification form right away. My advice is to reach out to that DCYF educational lead and try to get that. And then you'll want to check with nutrition services to make sure they're getting the free meals. Some of our foster care liaisons are super overwhelmed and they have a lot of students and they may not get that first piece of getting them that free meal. So just do a quick check-in and make sure they're getting their free meals. Again, no application is needed. You want to look and see if they have any fees and fines and then work with the caseworker to have those fees and fines paid. And then most importantly, you'll want to find that student, connect with them, make sure that they know that they have a trusting adult that they can go to who knows that they're in foster care and can help them navigate any issues that they're having. Next slide. Here's just some ideas on problem solving. If you are having some problems that you can't quite figure out on that building point of contact level, first you'll want to contact the social worker. And if you're not able to figure out who that is, which sometimes happens, you'll want to then reach out to your foster care liaison in your district. If something happens, maybe they're on vacation or they're not available, your next step is to contact your DCYF regional education lead. And again, you could find that on the OSPI foster care website. Then if you still can't get a hold of anyone and it's an urgent situation and you're having some issues, contact me. I'm here for you guys to help you navigate any problems that you have. Next slide. Connection and support is really important for our foster care students. So we want to make sure that they're continuing on some of those things that they've been doing before they went into foster care, such as maybe they're playing sports. We want to see if we can support them in any way so they're able to stay in those sports, or if they're in music after school, if they're in a band, or if they're in some kind of art program. We want to make sure that they're staying in after all these after school clubs and activities. We want to make sure that they're able to stay in all of them. You might discover that one student has fallen behind and they need tutoring. There is an organization that can help you with that, which I will talk about later today, which is Treehouse. And then the most important thing, think about what these kids have gone through. They've probably had some trauma in their home, which led to them being removed. And then they're moved into a home with a bunch of strangers who they don't know. It's very scary for them. And I'm a former foster parent, so I've seen how scary it is for these kids. I could be the most wonderful person in the world and they come in your home and it's just scary. They're not used to this new home that they're in. And sometimes there's not always a home. Sometimes they're put in some kind of group home. So they're going through a lot. So just remember that as a building point of contact, you're their one person that they can really know is a safe person that they could go to, that they could trust. And that's really an important piece for you to remember every day. I'm their person at this school. So really take that to heart. And on that note, we're talking about one caring adult in the school. And so we're going to show you a little video about being one caring adult.
Every student walks through the door wanting to feel valued. Every child deserves to have at least one adult in this building who knows them by name. We want 100% of our students to feel connected to a teacher in our building, and that's our goal. It was just a matter of how do we measure this? Early in the year, we conduct a teacher-student connection poster activity so that we can determine which students we've connected with and which students we need to work toward connecting with.
Delaney is allergic to red food dye.
Yeah.
And she also has a pond that she swims in.
We take their whole roster of students, we put it up on a wall, and we ask teachers to go through by name and face. Yep, I know this one, this one, this one.
All by name and face, man. I think that was a team goal by the end of the second week.
What?
Yeah.
End of week 2.
The activity was based around how well do you know your students. Just through this simple, adding a check mark next to the kid's name that you know by name and face, and then the other categories, academic status, and then a more in-depth personal story about them. She's one that slips under the radar though. She's pretty quiet. You look at a lot of kids and you go, hey, this student has one check mark. I know them by name and face, but other than that, I don't know where they're at academically. I don't know anything about their personal life. It's probably harder for them to feel valued in a learning environment without that connection to the teacher. So to me, that's what this was all about, a reflective process. How well are we getting to know our kids?
And so you don't get to know those students.
The stones in the river, that's what I like to call them. They're just letting the water wash over them. We got to go pick up that stone and turn it over.
We want them to reflect, and then it's time to develop an action plan. What are we going to do to make sure that these students are taken care of?
We have personal conversations with our students in the hallways during passing time. We also do things like thumbs up Thursdays or feel good Fridays, and we just take a few seconds to have kids share things that they're proud of.
To get to know the kids a little bit better on a personal level, just asking them a simple question as they come in the door. Example, last week I started off by just asking kids what their favorite food or fruit was. And then those questions can get deeper to try and get, a little more personal with them. Winter. What is it? Summer? Nice. The students here should be seen as people and not just pupils. The more valued they are for their individuality, the more successful they're going to be in the classroom, the more risks they're going to be willing to take, and that's awesome.
We have seen a huge increase in our students' connection to school, with their connection to the teachers, and I think that's probably the most joy teachers have in their profession. Then the real work can begin.
Thank you, Stacy. I think that's video is a great segue into the next portion of our first session, and that is learning a little bit more about who are building points of contact. I do know that there are a number of questions that were in the chat. What we're going to do is hold those until we get through this section, and then we will try to address them at the end. So first, just like reminding you that who are building points of contact, and we know that they could be any number of people. Sometimes there's the perception it's always the counselor, and that might make good sense in one school district, but in another district, it might be the administrator, it might be the vice principal, there could be social workers or family support staff who are playing that role. It really varies from district to district, and there's no expectation that you that it must be a particular role. It could be any number of those different people. You have to make it make sense for your district. And so one of the things around doing that is recognizing that this actually is a piece of legislation in the state of Washington. We are the only state that actually has it legislated that you must have a building point of contact in your school district, in your building, and they have to be appointed by the principal, and they have to be trained by the McKinney-Vento liaison. And speaking of training, a lot of you are here because this might be the training that your liaison and your district chose as the training that they wanted you to have to understand building points of contact and supporting students experiencing homelessness and foster care. And just a reminder that the law says that you're responsible for identifying homeless and unaccompanied youth and ensuring that they are connected to the liaison for supports. But there are a lot of other pieces that are available, that are there too around being that building point of contact. It is not necessary. It is necessary that you have a building point of contact, but you can have more than one. Wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. A lot of times people think, well, it must be like just this one person in my building. But for example, in the district that I worked in, we had a point of contact for every grade level for our high school, because the counselor was that point of contact in that building. That way it didn't fall on one individual in that building to have to be the person touching base with those students experiencing homelessness, because that can be challenging when you have 100 or more students in one building. So having multiple building points of contact can be very helpful from that perspective. And it is at the building level. It does need to be somebody that that student can connect with in the building, not I have seen districts say, well, I'm the building point of contact, but they're not in that building. And that's what we're looking for, is someone that that student can connect with in that building and that other staff can connect with in that building. And why do we need contacts? Well, so the responsibilities of the contact expanded are really to lead the efforts to identify those students and ensure that if they're qualifying for McKinney-Vento services, that they're connected to their district liaison, and then providing those building level supports to those students and families. And by that, what we're talking about is maybe this student wants to be in an extracurricular activity. As the building point of contact, you're actually going to know the path to get that student to that activity better than the liaison may know that path. You are probably going to be more aware of where your food pantry is and when a student is hungry and needs to be connected to it. You'll be better able to navigate, hey, does this student need to have breakfast or lunch? And do we need to connect with the cafeteria? These are all just different pieces around connections and services that you can make. And then also your role is to be there for your other school staff to help them understand what is it that students who are experiencing homelessness and or foster care are entitled to receive. What are their educational rights? And that can be done in tandem with your McKinney-Vento liaison, but it is a shared responsibility. And I like this analogy. I want to talk about the two separate roles, because sometimes building points of contact are better suited for one role than another. And I tend to think of our program a bit like an orchestra. And in an orchestra, you have a conductor. So your liaison is more like your conductor. They're the ones who kind of talk about, like, this is what the whole program looks like. And we're making sure that every person is like playing their part. And then the building point of contact is like first chair in the orchestra. So they're the ones who really like have the knowledge of the work in the, and communicating that with their school, a deeper knowledge. And then, of course, all of your staff as part of your teams are the ones who are there to implement the work. You may have your ASB coordinator or your registrar in your district or in your building, or your coaches or a teacher, or, it's just a lot of different people who are all working together to support that student. Whereas the liaison, they might be better suited to things such as, collecting data, arranging complicated transportation, ensuring that if there's a dispute resolution process that needs to happen, they would be the one that would navigate that. And they might be the one to facilitate like overall district trainings. It really varies again from school to school. It does, but it doesn't, it's not that prescribed, other than you must have someone who is in that role. And why? Why do we have building points of contact? And it's really all about capacity. One of the challenges of all of this work is that there's a lot of need and not enough hours and time to be able to do it. The McKinney-Vento Act requires that every LEA have a McKinney-Vento liaison, and that's all across the country. So this is a federal law. It means in every school district in the country, there is someone who is there to ensure that students are identified and receiving their educational rights. And that's that liaison role. But often in a district, the liaison will have many hats. I know in some districts, the liaison is the Title I director, the special programs director. Sometimes they're an attendance liaison. Often they can be a school counselor, a secretary. What I want to, really draw attention to is the fact that this is in our state for last school year, out of 297 districts that received Title I, so this was done based on a Title I report, and that's most of the districts in the state of Washington. 173 of those districts, that's like what, 2/3, has less than 4 hours a week dedicated to homeless liaison duties. And then of those 173 districts, 11% of them had less than an hour a week. So what you can see here is that there's just not enough staff time to be able to provide these supports. So that's why that building point of contact is so critical. Your contact is the person who has to, I think of them as kind of like the sustaining part of the work. If a liaison is out, or for some reason, maybe your district is in the gap between, maybe your liaison left and you have to hire a new liaison, the work still has to happen. We don't stop identifying students experiencing homelessness and providing them services. We have to still provide those services, even if they, even if there's not a liaison that's there in the building or in the district. Apologies. We're going to take another little poll just to kind of get familiar for all of you with how many hours do you have in your district to support students experiencing homelessness. So I'm going to launch a quick little poll there. And if y'all would just oh, look at that. Top one, less than an hour spent. Looks like about 2/3 of the room is answered. I'm going to give you a few more minutes. 1 to 5 is misleading. Tell me more, Patrice. It could be less than that for sure. Like, is that too broad of a span, 1 to 5 hours? Oh yeah, because sometimes it's just like maybe you have 2 hours, right? Is billing, what would we be billing for a student experiencing homelessness? I'm really interested in this question. Is billing considered supporting? Okay, let's go ahead and show the results of the poll. Well, as you can see there, the majority of you spend less than an hour and maybe somewhere between 1 to 5 hours. A few of you 6 to 10 hours. But when you really kind of get down to it, there are quite a few of you that just don't have a lot of time to do this work, which makes sense because if you're the building point of contact attending this training, you actually have another role. And that's where the majority of your time is spent, is working your other role. And you're probably only going to have a few students on your caseload in your building, maybe 10, 15. It really varies from district to district. And if you have more than that, then this might be somewhere where you would consider saying we need an extra building point of contact in our building. If you have a lot of students in your building that are experiencing homelessness, so that you do have enough time to both, one, do the responsibilities of your primary role, and two, also fulfill the needs of your students experiencing homelessness. Is it confusing, Christy, to discuss McKinney-Vento points of contact and foster care points of contact? We have considered and will in the future be doing those trainings separately, but there are a lot of things that are similar. Things like transportation to and from school of origin status, immediate enrollment and retention are things that are specific both to McKinney-Vento and foster care. Now there are nuances in there that are different, but that's one of the reasons that we do talk about them together. What you're given versus hours that are dedicated are different. I can relate to that. Yeah, and as you've indicated, Paula, in some schools, when you only have 215 students, you're just not dealing with, you just have a small population more often than not. Although I will say, one of the with the highest percentage of students experiencing homelessness is, I want to say about 37% of their 40% of their student population last year qualified as homeless, and they had 176, like 180 students. So you could actually have a large population of students that are experiencing homelessness, even if you're a small district, and you still need those supports to be able to support, that time to be able to support those students. That's good to know there in your building, Stephanie. You talked about like you have 75 to 80 students in your school and you have the highest number. This might be a situation where you would want to have, like, if you have a second person as another building point of contact, because who's going to support them when you're not there? We need, one that would be often the liaison that could be that backup person, but you would also want to look at, well, who's another person in my building who might be able to offer supports to students, and make that part of your plan, for your homeless education team or your foster care team. So we're going to stop sharing that poll. And move on. And just a reminder, and we've already mentioned this, that it's a team. There's a lot of you that are doing this work. And it might look like your coaches, it might look like community-based partners who contract to be in your building to provide services, but that we really want to be sure that whoever is the person that is your building point of contact is someone in your building and who is regularly in your building, not someone who's maybe only in your building 1 or 2 days a week. We are creating a statewide database of building points of contact to help students and families and our colleagues get more supported and connected. What we would like you to do is to please go into that online form. It takes maybe a minute or two to enter your information. It's your name, your email, your phone, what building you're with. And whether you are the foster care and or McKinney-Vento liaison. I actually sent that link out in the reminder email yesterday, so please take the time to complete that. The other thing, and I'm sitting here talking through this and I was going to let Melissa do that. Apologies, Melissa. But I'll go ahead and proceed with this one, is email her to be added to our weekly McKinney-Vento newsletter that comes out, because that's how we are letting you know about upcoming trainings, changes in legislation, resources that are available to you, office hours and things like that all come out through our newsletter. So you do want to be signed up for that if you're not. Will we be covering how we document our work for McKinney-Vento? No, not in this particular training. That really would be more of a McKinney-Vento basics or 101. But if you add that and you want to explore that as a conversation, Patrice, I'd be happy to have a conversation with you about it. We're going to talk briefly, very briefly, about the definition of McKinney-Vento. And the reason that we didn't go into this completely is because this is not a McKinney-Vento 101 training. This is really a building points of contact training. And what we're trying to do here is provide the resources and supports that when we sent out a survey, building points of contact responded telling us this is what they wanted. There are lots of resources, and I will drop those drop those in the chat while Melissa talks to you about the definition of McKinney-Vento for those of you that are new and maybe not familiar with it.
All right, thank you, Vivian. So just to kind of review McKinney-Vento. So McKinney-Vento is the law that states that those who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence, including children and youth, are allowed certain provisions. Sharing housing, the people that qualify as McKinney-Vento are people that are sharing housing due to loss of housing, economic hardship, living in motels, emergency shelters, living in public or private spaces that are not designated for originally sleeping accommodations for human beings, living in cars, migratory children living in any of the above situations. I'd like to also add substandard housing. So students that are living in substandard housing, including housing with no electricity or maybe no water or maybe bugs, they would fall under these substandard. It's also super important to understand and know that each child's situation is different and unique, and that it's a very case-by-case basis. So again, McKinney-Vento is students that are lacking the fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. Next slide. We also have unaccompanied youth, and the definition of unaccompanied youth is a homeless child or youth that is not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. This student, to qualify as an unaccompanied homeless youth, they must be both homeless, which means they're experiencing homelessness under the McKinney-Vento definition, and they must be unaccompanied, which the definition is not in the physical custody of a parent. A guardianship or custody issue cannot qualify a student for McKinney-Vento services with just that. I know in my experience, we deal with a lot of court paper documents that verify guardianship to find out whether or not a student is actually an unaccompanied youth. So if you do have any questions regarding that, please reach out to any of us here at OSPI. Back to Vivian for some identification.
And just really quickly, just things that you can cue in on. Is a student tired? Are they not turning in their homework? Have they been saying they can't make a performance because they live too far away? The bus driver's picking a student up from somewhere else. These are all cues and or clues that a student might be experiencing homelessness. They obviously are cues and clues for other things that might be going on in a student's life. But if you hear these, it's a good indication that you should dig in a little bit deeper with that student, maybe asking questions like, tell me more about that situation. Oh, you mentioned that you were sleeping at somebody's house. Tell me more about that. I love the phrase, tell me more. In the reminder email, we sent out some okay questions to ask around identifying students experiencing homelessness. Thank you to Sarah Miller with the Spokane School District who created that document. But it's there for you and has those questions available to you. There also is a sheet with resource links, and on those links are different resources for training. And I'm going to drop those in the chat while we're on break. And then just a reminder, there are different strategies for identifying students experiencing homelessness. Are you using a housing questionnaire, a universal needs assessment? You have your databases, of course, and then how are you connecting with students and their families to learn more? Is it through check-ins? Are you doing home visits? Are there parent-teacher conferences going on that you could attend? Does the student have technology access, and are you connecting with them through technology? Maybe it's an online situation that student's learning. These are all just different things that kind of come up that you want to maybe touch base on when you have an opportunity to connect with a student. So with that, we're going to take a break. I'm going to give you 10 minutes. So we'll come back at 11:07. And while you're on your break, what I'd like you to do is walk outside of your office and, if possible, all the way outside of the building, and then take just a minute or two to notice and observe what is it that feels inviting and welcoming in your school that you appreciate, you think that students might find might be appreciative of, and then what might be a barrier to students and families, or maybe it's perceived as a barrier. So we'll see you back in 10 minutes to talk about it. So thank you all for sharing in your those of you reading the slides and sharing, take a moment in the chat to share a favorite place of yours and why. And then we're just really going to shift now to how do we cultivate, trauma-informed practices and welcoming spaces. What are the resources out there and understanding the housing continuum, which were questions that came up when we surveyed building points of contact about what they wanted to know more about. And while you're doing that, I actually had said, think about your walk and take 2 minutes to write down a few characteristics you remember. Hopefully you saw the slide and we're doing that because those 2 minutes have passed and now we need to kind of move into breakout rooms. So what we're going to do is talk a little bit about how to enter the breakout rooms. Now, you will have a little icon once the breakout rooms are open that looks like that on your toolbar. However, you should just get an invitation to join the breakout room. So what we're going to do is have you go into breakout rooms. And while you're in there, you're going to get a chance to talk about what is it about your building, your school that is welcome and inviting, and what maybe could be a little bit better. We're only going to spend about 5 minutes in there, and then we're going to come back. Just a couple notes. If you need to leave the breakout room, be sure you click leave breakout room and not leave meeting. Otherwise, you could be out of the entire meeting and need to come back in. If you need help in a breakout room, if you will look on that toolbar, there'll be an opportunity to invite the host in for help. If you'll click on that, then I will come in and I will join you. So reiterating, please, in your breakout rooms, when you go in, you're just going to be sharing, a couple of observations that you made on your welcome walk. And then we'll come back together and maybe hear a little bit about some of the favorites.